Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Resistance. Women's Day is not a celebration, but it is a day of political action against what I consider one of history's most egregious and gravest forms of injustice, one that history itself hasn't held account for centuries. We have stood by as silent spectators watching as one of the largest oppressed communities in the world continues to get marginalized, sidelined, and dies in large-scale genocide from acts of sexual and sexist violence. I am talking about the violent exclusion of women from political processes, from decision making, and the discrimination and forms of violence that they experience and have experienced for the breadth of time and for the entire length of our history. Women's Day can't possibly be a celebration that we are okay with. There is no other oppressed community in the world that gets designated a particular day of the calendar year where we celebrate how kind and how beautiful and how nurturing and how inspiring they are and give them shopping discounts and flowers and chocolate instead of marking with rage that they die and stay poor and get hurt in so many ways around the world just because they were born into a particular community, just because they were born women. In fact, our entire view of the way we do global and national development is flawed if we consider women are only one mandate, that we consider the effort for their justice must be governed by a single ministry or one or two programs at most. Women are not the recipients of development. They are not one category of development. Women are stakeholders, and our equal participation must be ensured in decision making, in political processes, into the entire spectrum of policy work that goes into making development policy for nations and for the world. It is nothing short of our collective failure that in 2019 I can sit here and tell you the disturbing statistic that 1 in 3 women around the world have experienced sexual or physical violence in their lifetimes. The Me Too movement, of course, reiterated these numbers. It revealed to us the range of interpersonal and structural forms of violence and abuse that women face in their families, in public spaces, and in their workspaces. Now, I say revealing, but at a certain level, all women already knew this. As a world, we knew that this was coming. The Me Too movement has been nothing but a reckoning. But I will say that this new momentum for change and the many resurgent global campaigns that it has triggered, it hasn't just restated the problem. It has provided a form of remedy. It has provided relief. It has thrown light into the dark crevasses of injustice that have remained suppressed so long, not only of sexual violence within families and workplaces, but the full range of violations, of the gross violations of human rights of women, including trafficking. 70% of all global victims of trafficking are women. Female genital mutilation. A staggering 125 million women alive today have experienced FGM in their lifetimes. Child abuse, child marriage, and femicide. These movements have demonstrated to us that violence against women is more than just physical and psychological harm, that it can have a debilitating impact on women's access to resources and decision-making powers, that it erodes a woman's ability to make decisions within their families, to contest elections and participate in the vibrant process of democracy, to enter and stay in the labor force, and to fulfill their aspirations to be their complete selves, to do what they want with their lives. And it is very unfortunate that our response to this violence and this exclusion in many ways is often part of the same sexism and cultures of prejudice that fueled it in the first place. Our failure to believe victims, the impunity of perpetrators, the absence of measures to combat violence, whether it is through legal frameworks or our law and order systems, have pushed so many women into intractable cycles of violence from which they can no longer emerge. And the challenge of gender justice is not just about violence, so let us not limit our discourse to just that. I feel sorry sharing with you that over 150 countries around the world have at least one law within their legal frameworks that actively discriminates against women. Women earn on average 60 to 75% of the wages that are paid to men around the world. Women also own less than 20% of the world's land, and this figure gets smaller depending on what study you read. Let us remember then that gender justice will also come. Not only will it not come from celebrating Women's Day with flowers and chocolates, gender justice will also not come from more speeches and more paperwork, but from concrete and actionable and fast and quick and effective work at the grassroots. It will come from large-scale institutional change. It will come from a resistance that transforms the entire world, from economic empowerment to creating cultures and sociologies and societies of respect and equality, to creating laws and legal and social safeguards that protect women and hold them equal in front of the law and in societies and in workplaces where they are, and from investing time, real money, and real labor into this most urgent of tasks to which history has called us witness. The elimination of violence against women, the inclusion of women in everything must be mainstreamed in our education systems and in our curriculums, in city planning, in rural infrastructure, the way we make agricultural policy, in poverty and nutrition programs, in health policies and sanitation programs, and in addressing how violence affects women's access to decent employment and their participation in the workforce. It will demand our interventions into everything, starting from how a period shouldn't stop a girl from going to school, to ensuring that our entire economic systems, the superstructures and the ecosystems in which our civilization operates, across its value chains, across its networks, across its factory floors, are safe, are not intrinsically gendered in their language and in their systems and in their forms of discrimination, that they don't exclude mothers, that they don't harbor sexism, that the youngest girls are able to study and train in anything that they like so that they can find dignified employment and financial independence in a field of their choice, that our political parties, that our legislatures, that the people who make decisions, our boardrooms and our workforces belong as much to women as they do to men. The resistance also demands from us a feminism that is fully intersectional and aware of the various multiple forms of discrimination that women experience at the cusp of many different forms of exclusion in which they exist. Let us be fully aware of the multiple forms of exclusion at the threshold of which many women today stand. That the different kinds of violence that they experience could be because they are part of many different kinds of vulnerable population groups and communities. For instance, women with disabilities, women who experience conflict and war, who have to live in situations where sexual violence is often used as an instrument of conflict and war between two states or two parties, whose political status is undermined by other forms of discrimination. Our resistance will also have to span everything, from large-scale policy interventions to improving the way that women are portrayed, for example, in popular culture and in movies. And it will have to include the social policing of the volume of girls' voices, what they can and cannot wear, the places that they can or cannot go, instead of telling men not to harm them when they do. Our resistance will have to include the way that we talk about sexual violence, and whether our headlines in our newspapers and in our daily conversations with our friends and peers and colleagues, we can talk about abuse and assault without victim shaming. What was she wearing? What was she doing out so late? Without putting the onus on the woman to defend herself against an inevitable violence, that boys will be boys and this is going to happen, or using old-fashioned analogies about robbery and how you should keep your house locked if you don't want to be robbed. That we should be able to talk about sexual violence in a constructive way that prioritizes justice and support to survivors. And our resistance will have to change the discourse about the smallest of things. How a woman changes her title from Miss to Mrs. because her marriage status is so important. How female superheroes wear skimpy armor that don't protect them from anything because they are designed for the male gaze. How our most favorite movies don't pass the simple Bechdel test because they haven't been able to show us on screen a simple conversation between two women who have names and are talking to each other about something that isn't men. It will have to talk about our beauty standards that are sometimes so exacting that women have to undergo a serious body modification. It will have to change the way we talk about sexism itself. Let us be clear. Sexism is like ethnic hatred. Thinking a woman should be doing more of the housework because she is naturally destined to do that by a law of nature or by religion or by society is racism. The fact that women have to do more unpaid domestic care work because of certain natural attributes is a form of racism. Sexist jokes, let us be clear, are hate speech. The epidemic, the global pandemic of women being killed in acts of sexual and sexist violence is nothing short of a genocide. The fight against this egregious state of affairs is going to be led by women. The resistance will be led by women, but it will have to be fought equally and more by men and boys who often uphold these violent structures either by their participation or by their silence. So Women's Day to me is not a celebration, but it can be a day of political action for our most basic rights. In 2019, we shouldn't have to fight for the right for equal wages and against brutal violence. In 2019, we shouldn't have to debate the equality of women. And in 2019, we shouldn't have to explain to anyone that women are ultimately human beings. Not better, not worse, but merely equal to every other category of person and with equal rights in a democratic state. But what gives me hope is that I believe we are standing at the threshold of an unprecedented opportunity. This is the tipping point. There is a growing tide of women from all walks of life, from around the world, gathering, fueled by an entire generation of young leaders, demanding and implementing actual concrete changes. They are going to change history. I believe we can end this abhorrent scourge of the war against women in our lifetimes, because anything less than that, to spend a single day in the 21st century where women are subject to violence because of who they are, is completely unacceptable. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the resistance.